I think that's actionable. There's no truth in it. She can't possibly produce a single paragraph, sentence, or word in the whole of my history where I've approved apartheid. It's actually a lie.
Let's talk then about the content of the book. You say early in the book that, and I quote, Winnie's Odyssey became a two-part story. The first chapter, when she was cruelly oppressed, and the second, when she did the oppressing. A Joan of Arc transfigured into a Lady Macbeth. That's a very severe comparison to Lady Macbeth.
Yes, it is, and I think it's justified. The evidence I gathered was that she was responsible possibly for killing Stompie Seipei, and she was responsible for sanctioning a whole series of murders subsequent to Stompie Seipei's death.
But you particularly hone into this second chapter, as you call it, the Mandela United Football Club, the murder of the 14-year-old Stompie Seipei. You have a very specific narrative. Is it not unfair to focus on just one part of somebody's story when somebody's life is made up of so many stories?
No, I don't think it's unfair at all. I mean, I found in a prison in Zambia a man who had been put in that prison without charge or trial, and the president of Zambia told me personally and on camera that that person had been put in that prison on the orders of Nelson Mandela, and the reason he was in the prison in Zambia was to make sure he couldn't give evidence in Winnie Mandela's trial in connection with the death of Stompie Seipei, because the man's name was Katiza Chabakulu. He had decided that he was going to give evidence that he saw Stompie die behind the jacuzzi at Mrs. Mandela's home in Diepkloof.
So let's talk then about Katiza Chabakulu. So your focus is a lot on him in the book. He's the only person who said that he saw with his own eyes that Winnie Madikizela-Mandela murdered Stompie. Here's the sticking point, though. He admitted to previously lying. He changed his story, and at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where he told what you say is the truth, the TRC found that there were inconsistencies in his testimony, and yet you fully believe that he's telling the truth. How?
I fully believe that he's telling the truth because he has told this story about watching Stompie die many times. He had already told it to people before I found him in the prison in Zambia. He'd even told prosecuting attorneys in Johannesburg that he saw Stompie killed. He had told it to John Carlin of The Independent, and John Carlin of the Independent didn't report it at that time, but subsequently did report it. He told President Frederick Chiluba in Zambia that he'd seen Stompie killed by Winnie. And there's lots of corroborating evidence. I mean, for example, John Umuti Morgan says that he was ordered, Morgan was Winnie's driver, and Morgan says that he was ordered, after Stompie had been stabbed, to take the dog away. And Morgan said he refused to do that. Other people involved in the scandal say that they knew Stompie was dead. Kenny Kakasi, who was one of the people kidnapped from the manse of the Reverend Paul Ferrain, he said he knew Stompie was dead. And another guy, Pelo Megwe, told a Canadian journalist that he knew that Stompie was dead by the time his body was carried away, by the time he was carried away from Mrs. Mandela's home. I think there's plenty of corroborating evidence. As for the mistakes that Katiza Chabakulu made during the TRC, the big one on which he was grilled was to say that when he was kidnapped by Winnie Mandela, he was kidnapped from Shell House in the center of Johannesburg. At that time, in fact, the ANC headquarters was in Sour Street, but the mistake was mine. When I interviewed Chabakulu, I said, so you were taken to Shell House? And he said, yes, but he'd never been there before. And I put that idea into his head. I should have stood up at the TRC, or I should have gone behind the scenes and said, look, this man's being grilled relentlessly on Shell House, Sour Street, and that was my error.
So the crux of the book really is the alibi, though, right?
It's true. Well, that's one of the cruxes, yes.
Talk to me about that.
The alibi. Okay. Winnie Mandela's alibi was that on the dates of the 29th of December to 31st of December 1988, when Stompie Seipei was beaten to within an inch of his life, that she wasn't there, that she was 250 miles away in Brandfort. And some of the members of her football club testified, yes, she was in Brandfort. Subsequently, many of them began reversing their testimony. They said they had lied on the instructions of Winnie Mandela. The crucial one was John Morgan. He gave an interview, a remarkable interview, to Dawn Barkhuizen of the Sunday Times, in which he confessed that he had lied and that Winnie Mandela was in Soweto all the time on those crucial dates, 29, 31st December 1988, and not in Brandfort. He told Dawn Barkhuizen in a Sunday Times article. He subsequently gave evidence at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that he had lied, and a whole succession of other people came forward and said they had lied on the instructions of Mrs. Mandela.
But how do you separate the truth from the lies when so many of the witnesses changed their stories multiple times?
With difficulty. And I've set out the full story, and I've set out some of the contradictions and the possibilities. People who are interested and who buy the book will have to make up their own minds.
You suggest that the reason a lot of the evidence against Winnie Madikizela-Mandela wasn't presented in court, and the reason why she wasn't sent to prison is basically that there was some kind of collusion or agreement between the National Party and the ANC during negotiations. I think
people will have to read the final chapter of the book. I can't go into all the details, but my conclusion is that there was an agreement. I'm not going to use the word conspiracy. There was an agreement between the top levels of the National Party government and the top level of the ANC to make sure that Judge Corbett in the appeal court reduced Mrs. Mandela's 6-year prison sentence to a mere fine. And the reason they did that, perhaps it was reasonable.
But this is speculation.
It's not speculation. You must read the book. You must read the final chapter. It's conclusive, I think. I think I've proved it 99.9%. But all through the book, it's evident that the top levels of both movements did not want Winnie to be tried. They certainly didn't want her to go to jail, because you've got to remember at that time there were very delicate negotiations going on between the ANC and the National Party about the future of South Africa. And the great fear was that if Winnie was sent to prison, Nelson Mandela would be devastated. And also Winnie Mandela in prison would become a martyr. And this would possibly undermine the negotiations. And so that was the reasoning.